The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André and J. Thank you for tuning in, and big thanks to Uklu the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. Here we are with another episode, and it is December. It's December 2nd as I'm recording this, just before the episode, which will air on the 4th, Saturday. The holiday season is upon us, and hopefully you're all getting out there and seeing family. You know, I do love the holidays, I really do. Christmas is a favorite time of mine, because I don't know, it just seems like people are a little happier. I mean, whether they actually are or not, or they're just putting in a show for the season, I don't know, but in the end, isn't it still good that they're trying? I don't know, but I know I do. I like it. I like the music. I like the lights. I like the traditions. I like all of it. So I'm happy that the season is upon us, and we're gonna, be festive somewhat. It's very, very festive, very holiday-ish, and all that good stuff. Another bit of interesting news is the new podcast I'm doing with Dave and Scalehorn. It is called X-Rated, the X-Men Animated Series Review Podcast, in which we review episodes of the 1990s X-Men series that aired on Fox, talk about each episode, do a scene-by-scene analysis, and make a lot of jokes at some of the funny, cringier moments of those series, but also have a lot of laughs, and, just get deep down into a series that we both have a lot of affection for, and I think a lot of people do, because, nostalgia-wise, it is of my generation, and most likely of yours if you listen to this podcast. So it's another way to revisit that series and have some fun while doing it. It gives you a good reason to watch a new episode every week, which is fun too. So definitely tune into that. Is the X-Rated, the animated X-Men. I got to get used to this, being that it's my series, the X-Men Animated Review Podcast. David puts a lot of work into getting it out there and on the channels. It's on YouTube. It's on the Facebook live streams. It's on any other place you get your podcast, so make sure to subscribe, like. You can listen to the audio on the normal app, so you can watch the video on YouTube or the Facebook Live. It is all there for you. It's all for you, Damien. It's all for you. If you get that reference, you're my kind of people. All right, today I talked to J. Torres, a Canadian Filipino writer. He's worked on many, many books, written for television, written for DC, written for Marvel, written all ages books. He has some new ones that have just recently come out. And very interesting story. We had some fun talk about lending libraries, essentially, for comic books, which is fun, which I learned a lot about, sort of the Filipino comic market, the immigrant experience growing up, and how he got into comics. And, a deep love of comics from an early age. So, it was a great conversation. Super cool guy, very interesting, and I was very thankful that he was able to come on the show. So, you are about to hear that. And that would be my talk. Sometimes these things get away from me, folks. My talk with J. Torres. How are things going with you? How's life going?
Not bad. Really busy right now. I have a couple of projects I have to get done before the holidays, and just trying to, keep the house from falling apart and make the deadlines and winterize everything before the snow falls, and we get trapped inside trying to avoid the COVID. You know,
you're
the usual.
You're in Toronto, right?
Just outside Toronto, in a town called Whitby.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah,
Toronto's a nice area.
It's about 40 minutes from downtown Toronto, depending on the traffic.
That's probably a good amount of space. I feel like, I like going to larger cities, but I also don't like living in larger cities. So that's probably a good distance, I would say.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's manageable if you want to go downtown and check out a concert or sporting event or some other comic convention or whatever.
Yeah.
And we used to live downtown, but just got too unaffordable.
Yeah, I'd imagine this big city living is quite expensive. It's getting nuts, kind of, even in I'm in Nova Scotia, and even the housing market out here has gotten a little nuts because there's a lot of people with COVID trying to get away from the bigger cities and the bigger areas where lockdowns felt more, and kind of blindly buying places out here and just coming out to the East Coast, and in doing so, they've really cranked up the housing prices. Everything's like $100,000 more than it normally is.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure Toronto's just insane.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
No, it's to the point that you can't even rent there anymore, really. And it's like, I don't know who they expect to live there. Just rich people that don't want to have a house anywhere else, I guess.
Well, I don't know how people live here, period. Like, the rents are insane. I mean, we got lucky. We got a house like 12, 13 years ago, which at the time we thought, oh, this market is nuts. But now it's gone up like 500%. So we're lucky we got in when we did.
Yeah, we bought this one about 5 years ago, just before it all kind of, COVID and all that stuff started. So I was pretty lucky that I got it when I did, because it would be way more expensive now if I were to have bought it like yesterday or even like a month ago. Cool. So where were you born?
I was born in the Philippines, in Manila, and my family immigrated to Canada when I was about 4 years old. Mm-hmm. So we've been here quite a while, many decades now. I grew up in Montreal, and I moved to Toronto, I want to say about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then, that's where I've been ever since.
What did your folks do?
My dad, both my parents are passed now. Oh, my dad what was the last thing he did? Because he switched jobs around. I mean, like, he was working for like a paper and corrugated paper and box company for a while. Mm-hmm. Mostly in sales, I think. And then he was like he studied chemical engineering. Don't even ask me what that means, because I don't know. You may know, but I don't. And somehow ended up like working for Firestone at one point, and then like a corrugated box company at one point.
So he was like in the lab then. He wasn't like just a...
No, he was in the office.
Oh, really?
The thing. Like, I have no idea what he actually... I never really got what he did. It was just, to me, it seemed like a very typical office type job. My mom's much easier to explain. She was an accountant, mm-hmm. a bookkeeper, and then an accountant. Worked for the Hilton Corporation until she retired. Mm-hmm. So that's easier to explain. But what my dad actually did, I really couldn't tell you. I mean, I just know he went to an office and wore a suit and tie. So it wasn't any kind of lab type work.
Interesting. I always find that interesting with the the immigrant experience. It seems that people come to these places, they it seems like the worlds of their careers go from like something to something completely different. It's like, you'll talk to people whose parents are like, my dad was a heart surgeon in, Lithuania or something, and he came here and he like drives a cab, like it's just, it's such a, dichotomy of it is so interesting and different. It's
well, I mean, part of the problem is that they don't recognize, the Canadian government and the US government don't recognize degrees and educational background from other countries the same way, right?
Yeah, which is insane, like literally insane to me, because especially in this country, they're crying for doctors and crying for, all these different professions, especially in my area, like in the East Coast. And then they'll turn people away on minor things like the fact that it's I'm sure doctoring is similar across the board, or there could be some kind of test that can be taken to prove that it's comparable.
Yeah, there's got to be a happy medium. I can understand, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you just didn't know as much about the world and other countries and what their educational system was like. But it's 2022, right?
Yeah.
We're able to look these things up. We're able to do like equivalencies and We know what people have done, and yeah, there's got to be some kind of happy medium, like you said. Just it's funny because like for as long as I can remember, every dentist that I ever went to had a Filipino dental assistant in the office. But then, when they find out I'm Filipino or my dad's Filipino, they start talking to you about their back home I was a dentist, had my own practice, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that they can't practice fully here is because of the equivalencies are different. And then they can't afford to go to school and blah blah blah. And just, but I'm sure they're fully capable of doing whatever my dentist used to do, right?
Oh, 100%. I actually work with a woman that her husband was a dentist in Mexico, and then now he works in a dental office doing fixtures and stuff, but no actual dentistry for the same reason. His license isn't recognized here as being full on dental, and it's kind of nuts. Like, it's just, I don't know. I find it very sad that as the nations and all the information we have in the world, that we can't find some happy medium to make these people be able to, work their full careers and contribute to our society in a better way than, labor job. Not that that's not contributing, but, just in a way that more apt to all the work
especially
experience.
Especially in industries where we're lacking. Like, we do need teachers, we do need doctors, nurses. You know what I mean? Like, we have a shortage. So there's a workforce out there that we can actually tap into. You just put a bit of money into the testing and the the re-education or whatever you want to call it, and we'll have more teachers and nurses, before long.
Exactly. And to not scare people away with having them come to a country. I mean, at whatever reason they want to come here, aside from that, but to sweeten the pot even more so, to be like, well, here, you can just do your career here. We'll just, not have to put you through the rigmarole of going through school again, which would be insane. Because I know I don't want to go back to school again, especially if I had to go anywhere else. That'd be terrible. Cool. So was comics always something you had growing up?
Yeah, my dad was a comic book reader, so I was surrounded by comics.
Oh, really? What did he read?
What I can remember, I remember he was a huge fan of Mike Grell.
Oh,
and this
wow.
is before I knew who Mike Grell was. So I remember like Star Slayer and the Warlord comics.
Mm-hmm.
And later, what was there's
when
Green I discovered
for a while.
Yeah, but I was just saying, when I discovered comic stores when I was in high school, junior high school, so he would drive me to the comic shop and he'd tell me to go get, oh my God, what was it? John Stable.
Oh, yeah.
So basically anything Mike Grell did, he read. But also I remember, oh man, what was that? There was a series that he read. Was it Human Target? I can't remember now.
I don't think Grell did that, but it was older, yeah.
No, it wasn't just Mike Grell, but Grell was his guy, it seems. But there were other, like, he liked if there were James Bond comics at the time, he'd probably read them. So like Human Target was one. He liked spy and that kind of espionage kind of type of stuff, unless it involves swords and sorcery, like Warlord or whatever. So John Sable Freelance was totally right up his alley, because it was basically like a James Bond thing, and Warlord and Star Slayer both had swords. So
wow. That's super cool.
Either swords or guns.
Usually when I talk
he was never like.
Oh, go ahead.
He was never into superheroes. Like, I love superheroes, but he never showed any interest in superheroes, which I thought was kind of interesting.
That is kind of, and even rarer in that, I've talked to quite a few people on the show, and it's rarer that I run into people that were introduced to by their parents directly, especially immigrant parents. Usually it's something they discovered while they're here, or an older brother or a friend or someone that they met through school or something. So it's unique that he was that deeply into especially American.
I don't know if it was that deeply, but he definitely read them, and I remember
deeply enough to know, even at that time period, to know what all those comics were is deep enough, even to know Mike Grell.
I remember knocking on the door of the bathroom, like when we lived in an apartment with just the one bathroom, and I'd be like, yeah, I gotta go, and he was like reading a comic in there, so it took forever. But,
5 more minutes.
But the thing is, like, Filipinos are known for being like voracious comic book readers. I remember when we visited. I did not know that.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I remember when we visited when I was, I don't remember, like 9 or 10 years old or something. And so my grandparents used to own a convenience store. And I remember being in the store with one of my grandparents, and a dude comes up to the counter and he puts a coin on the counter, like a quarter or whatever. And my grandfather takes a comic book down from, the shelf or whatever was back here and puts it in front of him. And the dude just read it standing there and then gave it back. And my grandfather took the coin and put it away. So that was a thing. Like you could just go into a store, read a comic for a nickel or a dime or whatever the equivalent is, and then go on your merry way. And there was like a bus stop just down the street or something. So I think people would come in, pay a quarter or whatever it was to read a comic, and then go get the bus.
Interesting. Was it like predominantly American or like North American comics, or was it?
Oh no, they were all Filipino comics.
Okay.
There's a really happening industry there for a time, and like even like DC during was it the Silver Age? I might be getting my eras wrong, but during the Silver Age, they recruited a whole bunch of Filipino artists like Alcala and Nestor Redondo, Alex Nino, all these dudes who did a lot of work for DC, like in the kind of the supernatural vein, like Swamp Thing and House of Mystery and all that kind of stuff, which I wasn't into. But later on in life, I discovered, oh yeah, all those dudes were Filipino. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so there was like there's a whole like big industry of comics back there, and I'm not sure if it's the same today, but yeah, it's very interesting, and it's fun because I'd never seen anything like that, like renting a comic until
that was very unique. I was like, that's an interesting story. I've never I guess it's like a library in a way, but it's like renting a movie but with a comic that you just sit and read.
Well, here's the thing. So I was saying my wife, who's South Korean, in Korea, and I don't know if it's still the same today, but when she was growing up, they had what they called comic rooms, which are basically libraries for comics where you would rent comics. You'd never own them. So when we first started dating, and she came over to my apartment, she's like, "What are all these books and comics? Like, what is?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What are all these books? These are my comics." And she would say, "Will you keep them?" I was like, "Yes, I keep them. What do you expect me to do?" And then she's like, "Oh, in Korea, we just rent them and you just give them back. Like there was no point in owning these things." And it was a big contention with the publishers out there because they would never they bought the store would buy the one copy.
Yeah.
But that was the end of that, right?
The whole town would read it, and then so you're not making your money back. Yeah,
basically, and they would never make another dime on that. So I think it eventually died away because the publishers kind of stepped on it. But throughout the whole 80s and 90s, it was a big thing over there.
Wow, that's super cool. That's a neat idea. I feel like that's something that could kind of come back. Although I feel like it may be like back in the day when they first started doing VHS movies, where like they'd sell them for like $100 a movie because companies would rent them out. Well, initially when you buy like a movie like Batman or something, it would be $100 to buy the VHS tape, and then eventually stores would catch on that they could buy them and then rent them to people, and then there was a huge legal battle over that, which I always thought was very interesting. So I can see why the industry would be questionable about it, but I also feel like, I don't know, if you go to a local library, it's very similar. There's lots of books there, even graphic novels now, which is super cool. Wow, that's really neat. That's a super cool idea, and something I didn't know about comic history. So like when you started getting into your own stuff, was it just reading your dad's stuff, or like what did you discover when you started reading your own books or finding your own?
I think because I was a huge fan of the Super Friends when I was a kid, and I think that kind of set me up to be like a big fan of superhero teams. So when I actually went and looked for comic books to read, I gravitated towards all the teams, whether it was the New Teen Titans or the X-Men, Avengers, Fantastic Four. It was always Justice League, of course. It was always about the teams. And I remember I had friends in high school who were like reading Spider-Man and Daredevil. I was just never interested in those books. I mean, first of all, we all had limited budgets, right? We had like a $5 allowance or whatever it was. And comics were already $1 a piece at that point. So you could only have so many. And I could only buy so many comics. So my choice was always the superhero teams, and whereas I had friends who buy every Spider-Man comic or every Flash or the solo books and stuff, but I was like, no, there's got to be at least two superheroes on the cover, or else I'm not going to pick it up.
Do you feel like it was just economical, or is there something else as to why you gravitate towards teen books?
No, I think it was more about the group dynamics and just having more people, like, because it's the same page count, right? And I think it was just, I liked teams. I blame the Super Friends. When I was a little kid, I would watch that every Saturday, and it was always like, okay, which 3 or 4 heroes are going to be featured this week or whatever. And that was always fun. You'd see all of these heroes in the credits, but of course, not all of them would actually be in the story. And it was the same for me in the comics. And I love, like, one of my favorite things about those comics, particularly the Avengers, was when they would do the big recruitment drive.
Mm-hmm.
And, they'd have, like, the big announcement of which 7 heroes were going to be part of the new lineup and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to happen, like, every 6 months or whatever back then.
But
I loved it. Yeah, no, I loved it. And I remember when, like, the Fantastic Four would even shake up its lineup. And it wasn't just a regular 4. Like, She-Hulk would come in and...
Well, it was always a cool way to get new characters or newer or, like, obscure characters to get more of a platform and to kind of introduce you to them. I know with Super Friends, they had sort of their own versions of heroes that they created kind of for the show with your Apache Chiefs and your Wonder Twins and that sort of stuff. But even like when Avengers would do that, or they splinter off for like West Coast or one of those other sort of groups, and you start seeing like Tigra and like Stingray and all these other characters that like you may have incidentally saw here and there, but never really had their own books, maybe in a Spotlight issue or a Marvel team up. So it's kind of neat to give, more insight to those characters and kind of learn about them.
Oh God, I loved it, especially when like some of the writers would like have the crazy, Avengers recruitment where everybody shows up.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
and then Captain America would be like, "Okay, everybody line up. We're gonna pick the 7," and then somebody would go, "Oh, this is crazy. I'm out of here." And then it would be like Black Panther, like, "I don't have time for this," and he would leave, and so that would kind of cut back on who had to.
It always seems kind of dumb, and I mean, comics are great for a lot of reasons, but it always seems like if you actually put a lot of thought into that, you're like, wouldn't as many heroes as possible be better? Like, couldn't you cover more space, save more people? But you're like, no, we only need 7. It's like forming a band. You're like, we just got to find everything that works, and that's it. The rest of you can go back to.
Well, that's what I loved about Justice League Unlimited, because it was like everybody, and it's like, okay, well, today we're going to use 5, and these guys are busy over here, so let's send these 3 over there. That's what I loved about that series.
Oh, it was one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, I wish they did the comic more that way, but
it would have been nice, especially when you get like featured characters, like a whole episode about the Question, or sure. that wonderful episode where there's like a massive world-shattering event going on over here, but instead they're following Blue Beetle and Booster Gold while they're doing on some side mission that actually turns out to be just as important, but in the end it was just crowd control to start it all off.
Right. Yeah, they did a lot of great storytelling on that show.
Well, yeah, that team can do no wrong in my eyes. Like, obviously, I was born in '85, so the Batman animated series, the Superman animated series, and then eventually Justice League and all that stuff was right in my developmental years, along with like the Fox cartoon Spider-Man and X-Men.
Right.
So as a kid, back before Marvel was such a huge thing with movies, this was all you had. So you beside the comics, you just had to grab onto those and learn about things that way as well. So was like writing art, like what was like when you're reading comics, was wanting to do them always part of it, or is that something that came later?
I guess like a lot of kids, when you're absorbing all this really cool storytelling and stories and art, as a kid, you kind of want to emulate that. So yeah, I would write stories and draw stuff when I was a kid. But I eventually realized that I wasn't much of an artist, so I focused on the writing. But I do remember, like in the 3rd grade, writing my own little comic strip for the school paper, and that was obviously influenced by what I was reading. So, and that kind of started me on this path to being a comic book creator.
Was that a superhero group book as well, or story?
No, it was about a bowling ball. It was about a bowling ball and like 10 pesky pins. I don't remember the premise beyond that. I just remembered this bowling ball like punching the pins and the pins getting back up, and the bowling ball punching the pins some more. That was about the extent of. But some people thought it was funny. So
yeah, sounds good to me. I think we could really unpack it into like some comparison to like Sisyphus rolling the boulder uphill for eternity or something.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with like my family life at the time. I don't even remember.
Was it? So I was going to say, was it something that was happening in your life at that time, or just something that seemed relevant? I guess.
Well, I remember my dad was in the bowling league, but that's about. And I hated coming. I love going with him because they had arcade games. Mm-hmm. But I hated coming home smelling like an ashtray.
Yeah. Don't miss those days that going out in public meant you had to smell like an ashtray when you came home. It's nice the world has shifted away from that. So, siblings? You any siblings?
Yeah, I've got a younger sister and a younger brother, neither of which are particularly creative in the artistic sense.
Mm-hmm. So they never gravitate towards comics?
No, not at all. I mean, my sister is fitness instructor and personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother works for Bombardier, so not.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I suppose my sister's creative in the sense with the choreography and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not, not in the fine art sense, I guess you can say, or literary sense.
Mm-hmm.
My brother definitely not. I mean, the dude rarely picked up a book and always came to me if he needed help with art, or my sister, like, oh, will you help me draw this, or color this in, or whatever the hell it was.
I was wondering about perhaps the gravitation towards team dynamics may have to been with a busy household, a lot of conflicting personalities and stuff. I mean,
well, maybe it was that I wanted something more exciting than what was going on at my house.
That's very possible. Yeah, if only my sister had superpowers, and we were all
or like monsters. Something. Right, exactly.
So, did beyond high school when you got into college and stuff? Was it in towards writing, or what was the next step?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, back in my day, they didn't have comic book programs, for art or for writing that we now have. I mean, you could even take an editorial class these days, and like marketing and administration for comics, or at least in publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I could do at the time was basically go online and look up people's scripts and learn from that, and then take whatever writing courses were available to me at the time. So I took a journalism course, I took a playwriting course, a children's book writing course, just anything that allowed me to do some kind of writing, just to kind of learn how to do this. Mm-hmm. But most of it was just copying scripts I saw online and following that format, and learning from reading and looking at other people's work.
Mm-hmm. Was there any scripts particularly that sort of drew your attention as far as that goes, or is it strictly format, like just the style of how you write a script in that manner?
Well, it's interesting because I don't remember which script it was, but it was one of Alan Moore's scripts, and I was fascinated by the detail in it, including the annotations and the footnotes. And for a time, I kind of sort of wrote in that style, like not just full script, but full script with a capital F. And over the years, I realized, and plus, I saw other scripts. Over the years, I realized how useless that was, or what a waste.
I was going to say, around the time you started handing them to artists and then seeing what they did based on what you suggested.
Yeah, and the thing is, it depends on the artist. Some artists would take it and just devour every little word, every detail, and every hyperlink, click every hyperlink you sent, and look at every visual reference that you referred to. And then others are like, no, I'm just going to draw this the way I want to, and you tell me what you think when you're done. But then I discovered other scripts, like, I'm trying to think, like, I think it was James Robinson or Warren Ellis, that had a lot more pared down, very simple, more screenplay-like scripts.
Yeah, Ellis's I find are like that. I've read quite a few of his. I mean, his dialogue is tremendous, but usually the action is left wholly up to the artist.
Yeah, I was going to say the art direction is really, open or even you could argue vague, and it was mostly about the text and the dialogue and the narration driving it forward, right? And yeah, it took a while for me to figure that out, what kind of format and what kind of writer I wanted to be. And I remember reading like David Mamet books and all sorts of manuals about writing and how to be a better writer and so on. And eventually, and I remember having a really great conversation with Bendis about that. He's the guy. Bendis was the person who turned me on to Mamet. He's like, "Oh, you got to read this book on direct and film by David Mamet. It taught me everything I know about how to be a writer or whatever." And I was like, "Really? Okay." But it's about screenwriting. It's like, no, but you'll take away something from it. And he was right.
Does not surprise me in the least that Bendis is a Mamet fan. Mamet's scripts. I mean, God, watch Glenn Ross, and it's all dialogue. It's all closely knit, tight. Like it's all in the conversations between people, and it's very no, that's great advice, fantastic advice. You Bendis is just someone you've met through the convention circuit, or is he someone that you came up with? Or?
Yeah, no. So I met him through. I mean, we have a lot of mutual friends.
Mm-hmm.
We both started out at Oni, pretty much, and had a lot of mutual friends. I remember. So I don't remember the first time I met him, but at one point he was here in Toronto for a show, and that was the first time I met him, and we actually sat down and talked for a bit. Mind you, I don't even remember if I've spoken to him since. I think we may have emailed once or twice over the years, but yeah. Anyway, so it was just one of many conversations with, writers much better than I, who passed on some really good advice, and it stuck with me.
That's fantastic. So once you got that underway, like you've learned the process and you got your style down, where was the next step as far as getting to the publishing stage?
Well, to be honest, I'm still learning. I mean, I'm constantly changing my script formats, and it's funny because sometimes I'll use one format with one artist or one editor, and then I'll use another format with another editor. And when I go back to edit, I realize, oh wow, these are totally different looking script. I mean, in terms of the formatting, not necessarily content or the style, but for whatever reason, I just, I open Pages instead of Final Draft, or use a PDF instead of Word. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So I think I'm still looking for the one. Whereas I know guys who've been writing for comics a shorter time than I've been, and they've stuck to the same format for the whole, their entire time. But anyway,
have you ever read a Frank Miller script? I remember reading it one time, and I was very taken with how he writes it like a novel, just like a paragraph in a book.
Yes,
and it's
that's the thing too. Like I think different writers need different approaches. So I'm not going to name any names, but I have a friend who obviously, when he scripts, he's trying to show either himself or the artist that he knows how to quote unquote write in quotations, where that's not necessary in the script itself, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Well, it seems like a waste of time, really.
Yeah, but I think to me it is, but it could be very well be their process. Like they can't do it any other way. Like they have to write it, like you said, as if they're writing prose, right? Whereas there are other people who write it like they're writing a screenplay, and others who write it like it's a letter. I can't remember whose script it was. Maybe it was a Judd Winnick script, or somebody who were just basically like, okay, let's say the artist name is John. It's like, okay, John, this is what we're going to do. Panel 1, blah, 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 blah. And then later on, page 21, panel 1. So John, do you remember when you were a kid and you would do blah, blah, blah? This is what we're trying to. So it just depends on the,
Yeah.
And I totally understand that, because the way I script usually, often, I would say at least, depends on who it's for. So if I'm writing a script and there's no artist attached, there's a certain way I write. It's a lot more detailed because I don't know who's going to be drawing it, right? And obviously, if it's a creator-owned thing, it's brand new, you have to describe more stuff than you would if you're writing a Batman script. But if I'm working with somebody that I've worked with before, there's a shorthand there, and I don't have to get into the same amount of details, right? And there's also trust that you have there with that person. Or if you're working with somebody, if I'm doing a freelance gig for, let's say DC, obviously if it's a Batman story, you don't need to describe Batman or the Batcave in detail. The person needs to know what that is, or they can figure it out, right?
Yeah, I never discussed that with a writer. Is it like a great amount of fear? Not fear, but like when you're going into a new project and if you're unfamiliar with the artist, is there a lot of trepidation as to being worried that they're going to carry out your vision in a way that, or is it just sort of trust in that if they've made to this level, or say it's an artist that's DC hires that you're unfamiliar with, is it just a level of trust for their organization to say this guy's probably been vetted well enough to know that he can do it?
Yeah, here's the thing. Like over the years, I've learned to let go. And there have been times, particularly early on in my career, like I would do a freelance gig for Marvel or DC, whatever. And yeah, you hope that whoever is drawing it, whether I know who they are or not, does what you want them to do. And stuff has come back where I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like they totally missed the point, or this isn't right, and you express your concerns, and then hopefully it gets fixed, but it doesn't always. And then there are other times where it comes back and you're like, holy crap, this is better than I would have expected, or even like, oh my god, they literally pulled this out of my head. So it happens. It could go either way. And over the years, I learned not to worry too much about it, because it's going to be what it is, right?
Yeah.
As they say, it is what it is. And some artists bring more to the table than others, and some artists will surprise you one way or the other. And a lot of times, especially if it's a freelance thing, there's not much you can do. Not only because you're not in control, it's not your story per se. You're just a hired gun, but at the same time, there's no time. A lot of times it's like there's no time. When you're doing like the monthly grind, it's just like they've got 2, 3, maybe 4 month lead time in most cases to get the thing right. And a lot of artists either don't have time, or the publisher won't pay for them to take the time to fix something. So you just kind of got to go with it. Yeah. And when I first started out, that first issue that came out, second issue that came out, I'd be like, oh man, this isn't perfect. My career is over, or this isn't my vision. Like people are going to think I suck. But once you get into like issue 13 or 14, you don't even remember what the hell number 1 and 2, what issues you had with 1 and 2. Yeah. It's just kind of like, I don't, to this day, people bring comics to me at conventions to sign. I'm like, oh, I don't even remember what this is about. I'll be like, can I have a second? I just want to flip through. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember this now. I kind of sort of remember this, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So what was
and at the time, I might have been stressing about, oh man, that panel or that dialogue and on that page. Oh man, my career is over. People are gonna think I'm gonna suck. But then
I feel like you probably beat yourself up. Like there are people that's favorite comics are probably the one your least favorite one you've ever done is, And you're right. I think letting go is important. This will drive yourself insane. Otherwise, you'd probably just be holed up in a cabin somewhere. Nobody understands my genius or something, or can do my vision. Kind of.
Well, I've seen that in other people, other artists and other writers.
Yeah.
They second guess themselves and they stress about things being perfect, and they become immobilized, right? Yeah. And you can't do that. I mean, let's face it, it's just comics. We're not performing surgery on somebody and go, oops, that is true. Let's just move on to the next guy.
And the fact it's art means it's subjective. So it's even different, even more varied in that, whether it's not something that naturally gravitates towards you, whoever's reading it, it may gravitate towards them, and in a different level than what you're seeing as well. So
I think a lot of writers and artists see mistakes in their work that people won't even notice. Right. And that goes the other way too, where you put in detail and you're hoping, oh, please appreciate me. Please appreciate my genius. And people are like, nobody mentions it. 100 reviewers and not one person mentions that one thing you put in that you thought would make you like, people would be like, he's the next Alan Moore, but no, nobody noticed.
Yeah, it's like some off thing in the back panel of the thing that's just hidden that you're like, it's perfect foreshadowing. If you notice that, it's gonna all make sense.
Yes. Yeah. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's working in a project with me, and he's like, why am I even putting these effing Easter eggs here? Nobody cares. And I'm like, it's for us. It's for us.
Yeah, we care. We'll enjoy it.
It's for us. Because we're so clever. Just put it in there.
I do the same thing with, I do some acting, and like if I'm in a play or something, and there's a line or something I find really clever, the way that I did it, or another actor in the play does it. I find it so like, it just amuses me so much. And if the audience doesn't laugh at it, I'm like, what's wrong? Like in my head, I'm like, what's wrong with you people? It's genius. What they just did is genius. And you're missing it. It's funny how you can fall into those traps. Cool. So what was the first published thing? Like what got you your first published work?
Officially, it was this thing called Copybook Tales, published by SLG Graphics out in San Jose, illustrated by my friend Tim Levins. And it was basically a story of a bunch of 80s kids or kids going through high school in the 80s, loosely based on me and my friends, and a little bit of Tim. And so that was like the first thing we ever had published. Came out in the mid to late 90s. Was
that just something you submitted to slave labor, or is that something that
Well, Tim and I had produced a handful of mini comics.
Okay.
Or what some people call zines. this kind of DIY kind of comics that you photocopy and staple in the back of a van as you're hurtling through down the highway to the Motor City Comic Con to sell these like for 75 cents or whatever it was.
A simpler time.
Yeah. And so, we did a handful of those and garnered a teeny but very loyal audience. And then I think we sent copies of that to different publishers and editors and mostly got ignored. But this one publisher in San Jose liked it and said, hey, you want to make this into a quote unquote real comic? And so we did that for like 6 issues. Didn't make any money. But the cool thing about that comic is that it got the attention of some people who would later be very helpful to us in our career. So people who were either comic fans at the time, but aspiring to be like an editorial, or people who were like interns at DC or in one case Nickelodeon at Nickelodeon magazine, who would later become editors at DC or Marvel, and they would remember this little comic called Copybook Tales and be like, hey, this guy might be good for this and this guy might be good for that. And that's how it's like being in a band, right? And you gig at Al's used car lot one weekend and just the right person happens to be coming by, or you gig at some high school dance and someone's mom just happens to know somebody who's a record exec or something, and it just kind of goes from there.
That's super interesting because I talked to quite a few people and a lot of those stories are the same thing. It's just they met a person who knew a person, or they met someone then when they were both, just starting out, that turned out to be somebody important that got their book in the right hands, and it went on from there. So that's cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story of the world, right? I mean, that's how people get jobs.
Yeah.
You usually know somebody who can get your resume in at the right time to the right person, and it goes from there.
But like comics are interesting because it's rarely the traditional way you would in any other industry. Well, besides like acting or something, but you just show up with a resume and say, here's my work. And you know what I mean? Like it's rare that you bring a book to Marvel. Like if I walked up to Marvel and said, here's my Spider-Man pitch as a nobody, they wouldn't listen. They turn you away. So like,
right. But
some experience, but also somebody to get your foot in the door.
Today, yes.
Yeah.
Now, right. In the 2000s, but back in the early 90s, late 90s and early 2000s, it was still possible. Like people, I mean, not literally off the street, but you would go to a convention and show somebody your portfolio and you would get a job. Now there's like this whole, you got to get a ticket and a wristband and get in line over here on this day. And you meet the screener and the screener will say yes or no. And then you go on to the next stage. And then you meet the actual editor who will go over your portfolio and they'll take your sample back to the office and maybe get back to you whenever they do. Like it's just, it's the type of thing. It's like, I remember, there were all those tropes in movies where somebody was discovered at like at a lunch counter, or like a beautiful woman was discovered walking down the street and then becomes this big Hollywood starlet. Yeah. So that used to happen, but, and it used to happen in comics, but now there's just there's so many more gates in front of you. So if you don't know somebody, or you just happen to have, the right thing at the right time, then you just got to keep at it.
Oh, that's I remember even going to cons. You're right, probably about maybe mid 2000s, and just getting to meet creators and talk about books with them. And to me, that was a world, like, just because I had some independent comics I did myself, to give them copies and say, and, just get some feedback, not in a way that I was expecting to go get anywhere really, but just, to give it to people that you respect their work and see what they can tell you about it. And I was kind of floored with how open and cool many of them were. Like, Sergio Aragonés is like, come back tomorrow, and he came back, he read the whole thing and gave me mountains of notes. And the stuff like that was super impressive. But even I remember the portfolio thing, there were some people doing that, and I didn't feel confident enough at that point, I still don't, to go do something like that. But like that seemed like the avenue that you would go, because even before that, wasn't it like packages you would like mail from DC, like to write to ink or to write artist or Marvel, like where they would send you. Yeah,
there were tryouts, they called them. And now, if you look up the submission guidelines for most of these publishers, they'll tell you they don't accept unsolicited submissions. Yeah. But when I was first starting out, you could just send in a sample script or a DC. I remember was asking for like these, 3-4 paragraph springboards for whatever title you.
I remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
And now it's like, no, we won't even look at it. We can't even. And the not necessarily DC, but other companies that I've worked for have told me, if you're sitting at our table, do not look at anyone's submissions because of legal issues there. Like if someone tries to pitch something and next thing you know, you're writing a story that's similar, then
makes perfect sense.
You can't even like look at someone's, sample anymore.
Yeah, I guess legally you're right. If you did a Batman book and all of a sudden something similar to what this guy showed up in it, legally they could be in quite a bit of, especially now with Marvel and the movies and everything else. Like it's such big business that lawsuits could be huge. And even cost a lot of money.
Right, and even if they don't amount to nothing, like it's a totally frivolous case.
That's a time waste too.
It's just the hassle of having to prove that you did nothing wrong or whatever.
Yeah, which I imagine gets grayer and grayer as the years pile on, and also and I mean their cup as far as people trying to get gigs there must runneth over in a way that everyone is constantly trying. So like it's not like they're in a vacuum of talent. They're probably overrun when it comes to that sort of stuff. So
yeah, I kind of feel like over the years competition has become, if not harder, at least more widespread. There's just more people, trying to get a seat at the table. That's always been the same number of chairs, but now there's more people lining up to try to get those seats. Not necessarily quality, but quantity for sure.
Do you find that it helps because like you've sort of found a bit of a niche in sort of like reader friendly, like kids, not predominantly kids, but with younger age books. So do you feel like if you find your kind of pocket that like editors notice that you tailor well to that sort of demographic they need, that you're sort of in their good graces and someone that'll constantly kind of be in
there? For sure. Like I don't honestly, if I hadn't found that niche or had become known for writing good comics for younger readers, all ages type comics, I don't think I'd have a career right now. Some people say it's good to be known for at least something than to be not known for anything at all. Not to say that, writing for kids is a bad thing. I love it. It's the thing, my most favorite thing to do in comics. It's not the only thing to do, but it's sort of my wheelhouse. And yeah, I mean, I get offers because people know my work for younger readers. Right. And it's almost like sometimes if I want to get out of that kind of world, I kind of have to work a bit harder because people think
you can only do that. Yeah.
Right. Or they're surprised when somebody's like, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested in writing a horror story. I know you don't usually. I'm like, no, yeah. I'll do stuff. I'd love to do a horror story. So
it's kind of interesting.
It's better to be known for something than nothing, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that people think that, like that it's almost like a human nature thing that you have to make a box to fit somebody in. You can't just let them be an entity on their own. You have to say, well, he's he's a kids writer or he's a horror writer. And same with actors too. Like, well, he just does comedy. He couldn't do something serious. And it's like, well, give him a shot. Like, or go read go watch the other things they did or read the other things they did that go beyond what you expect them to do. And I'm sure you'd be quite surprised. So what was your entry into that, like doing kids books? Was it like X-Men Unlimited or one of those adaptations of the cartoons, or was it something?
No, actually no, because I mean it's weird, or maybe it's just natural, but from the very beginning I've always wanted to write a little bit of everything, but a lot of what I wanted to write skewed young. I don't know if that's the effect of like Disney or Pixar or the cartoons they grew up, Bugs Bunny. It just, it's made for kids, but definitely has something for adults. I don't know. That's just my sensibility. That's generally where I kind of land when I try to write a story. So early on, the copybook tales was the thing that I mentioned was the first thing I ever did, which obviously skewed towards somebody who went to school in the 80s. Otherwise, or somebody who's interested in 80s nostalgia or coming of age type stories. But around the same time, I also developed this book with J Bone called Alison Dare, which was about a girl, kind of Indiana Jones adventurer type thing. And it was made for younger readers. But at the same time, there was something in it for older readers. So it was kind of like that Pixar principle where it's like made for a little bit of something for everybody. So I've always, and Alison Dare was one of those books, like Copybook, that somehow the right people glommed onto. So small but loyal following, but somebody in that little, group of readers ended up being an editor over here, ended up, working for this publisher. So they're like, hey, he would be good at this, or he would be good at that. And so it kind of went for there. So it's not necessarily that, like the one thing, it just kind of was always something that I did. And then it kind of just opened up from there and led from one thing to another.
Do you feel like applying those principles to existing properties like Teen Titans Go or recently the Rick and Morty series you're doing is constricting in a way, and that you have to like kind of fit into what they're doing with the show? I mean, I know kid shows aren't super, it's not like someone's going to die next episode, so you need, you know what I mean, you can't use that character, or they're going to have some deep emotional change or something, because they usually stay kind of consistent or try to be, in a way that you can engage with each episode in its own way. But do you feel like, as far as creatively what you want to do, trying to fit into that box is difficult at times?
Yes and no. Here's the thing. Like, I won't take the gig for like a licensed property, whether it's, based in animation or a comic line or a movie, if I'm not invested in it somehow, like if I'm not already a fan, I don't know if I can bring anything to it. So, I've done everything from, like you said, Titans Go and different Batman comics to like Rick and Morty and The Simpsons would skew a bit older. But if I wasn't a fan of those properties to begin with, I don't think I would have been able to bring something to it. I mean, I've been asked to write for other things that I've said no to because I'm like, no, I just have sorry. I have no interest. It's just not, I've been approached to work on everything from like My Little Pony to like, gosh, I don't even, just some crazy, like, what was the last, I think so, what was the, Warcraft,
like the
just
game,
like this whole gamut of things that people are like, hey, he might be good for this. And I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm glad you thought I would be, but it's not something I'm interested in. So so it's not, I mean, it can be constricting, it can be a bit restrictive, but if I'm not into it, you know what I mean? Like, then I can't help you. But if I'm into something, like, and I like it enough that the stories are generating in my head, and you're telling me or asking me if I want to contribute to this thing, then, it's a go for sure. And I tend to write things just how I feel would work for whatever property, but even something like, let's say, Rick and Morty, I'll go full on, rated R or NC or PG-13, whatever it is. But then the publisher might have to dial it back because, hey, we're trying to sell this in, Peoria, so we can't do this. Or,
I'm a huge Rick and Morty fan, so I can.
Right. Or like, Walmart won't carry this if you have this. So the thing that you do as a creator is you just tell the story you need to tell and let editorial and marketing sort out the rest of it later. And it's the same way I write when I write for kids. It's like, well, I think this is funny and I don't think it's inappropriate. I would show it to my own kids, but the editor and publisher might not agree with that. So then that'll we'll work that out before it goes to press.
Well, it's funny that something like Rick and Morty can, it's weird that something like that show, which if you watch the show, like they pretty much no limits to where they can go. Right. And then to contain it down to, a PG-13 or some kind of mentality for the comic, it'd be odd. I mean, and try to keep the characters' voices while doing that must be a difficult writing exercise, I would imagine.
Yeah, I loved writing the story I did for Rick and Morty. But yeah, there were certainly things that I was just like, I was told, I don't know if we can get away with that. And I'll be like, yeah, you can. and then it's like, they would maybe ask whoever was their contact person was with Cartoon Network or the Rick and Morty people, and they'd be okay with it. But then marketing would be like, no, we can't. We get in trouble for that, regardless of what the property is, right? So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen sometimes, and you just have to go with it.
do you find like, because with Marvel or DC, for instance, for those big ones as well, because I know I've talked with Ed Brisson and he brought up the like wanting to work with a character, and then like Marvel being like, oh no, we're using like the Constrictor or whatever in an event, you know, that he's a big part of over here, or like he was just killed last week in, you know, Sabretooth comics or something, that it would really throw a lot of
it's I have 100 of those stories. It's amazing. You know, because you know, you're the writer or the artist, you're in your own little space in your office, studio, whatever, you're doing your thing, but there are so many moving parts to these things, especially when you're talking about Marvel and DC. You know, every department has people to answer to, and those people have people to answer to, not even editorial, but, you know, like I said, sales and marketing and so on. And, you know, I mean, for example, I remember writing a Batman story where he goes to Arkham to talk to somebody, and just, I had like 2 or 3 people in the background in other cells, and he's just walking down, you know, that hall, and Poison Ivy was in one cell, and they have a little exchange, and I don't know who else was in the other cell. But then when I got the script back, they're like, you got to take Poison Ivy out. Why? Because she's in this other book and it conflicts. It's coming out at the same time. It's 2 lines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Or there was another instance, another Batman thing. I can't remember who it was, but they died between the time I pitched the story and they said, yeah, somebody else in another department killed them. And so I had to like change it or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was Brisson. Same thing. Like, I think it was Constrictor died, and he had to like just come up with Constrictor's son or someone like that. That was the new Constrictor to fill the role that he had sort of built. And in the end, it ended up working better for the story he wanted to tell. But it was still, you know, still in a way that you're like the fact she can't be in a prison cell. Like, who cares? Who's going to notice or care?
Well, that's just like a small kind of
but still, it seems dumb.
But I've been part of, you know, these and this is one of the reasons why I stopped doing this kind of thing. I've been part of like these like company-wide crossovers where like everything has to fall into place, or if one person misses their deadline or screws something up, all the dominoes fall.
That's got to be a nightmare.
So,
a nightmare.
I'm not going to say which it was, but if you look at my bibliography, you can probably figure out. But so I was working on this one miniseries, and the villain in our miniseries was tied to the big villain in the main crossover thing. And so we had a big reveal in a certain issue, and the reveal was a big splash at the end. But the main book was late, like really late, getting their issues out. And had we put ours when it came out, it would have spoiled their big secret, their big twist. Now, the thing is, we're like adjacent to them, but they're the main event.
Yeah.
So the poor artist drew this thing, and there's the solution by editorial to solve this was to basically just black out the entire figure so it looked like a shadow.
Okay.
So he went to the pains of drawing this character.
Oh no.
And they basically just became this big ass shadow on a splash page. It was so sad. Not only because the artwork was obscured like that or ruined like that, but also because it kind of messed up our storyline, because that was our big reveal. But our big reveal messed up their big reveal, but it would have been fine if everything was, you know, on time.
That's got to be a nightmare for editorial. Like, no wonder editors always seem to be so crabby when you talk to people, because to figure that out, you'd be a nightmare, especially because it's like your job is, remember like in high school when you had to do a group project and there's always like 3 people, somebody in the group that never did what they had to do. Like, that's your job for eternity. It's just group projects for eternity.
That is the perfect analogy, because there's always that one guy who's not going to do, you know, do their part, and it messes everything up for the rest of us.
He'll put his name on it at the end, but he, you know, like, or whatever. That's, I never thought of it that way, but I think it's 100% true that you just have to, like, that it would be a nightmare. I would probably lose my mind if I had to do a job like that, because I'm a very organized person, and if people couldn't do it,
And that's the thing, though. Like, I know guys who do this, who've been doing this for years and years, and they keep doing it. I did it for a while, and I was just like, okay, I can't. I'm done. My heart is. I put too much of my heart in it, and then this happens, and it's too much stress, and I'd rather like do my own thing or work on a kid's line where they pretty much let you do whatever you want. They just leave you alone. with the exception of a few things now and then. Or you just do your own thing, which is, easier.
Was you mentioned you have kids?
Yes, I have two boys, 10 and 13.
And are they fans of your work as far as the kids' lines of books go? Or is it like it's dad's thing, I don't want to do it? Or
well, the eldest, I don't know. It's funny because they're both very different personalities. The eldest, I think he was for a time, he kind of tolerated me or not tolerate. He humored me, It's like, that's good, Dad. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, awesome.
Wow.
But really he was not all that impressed or all that interested. Whereas my youngest was always like one of my biggest fans. Like he's always just, he's always been like the guy. He's like, I have two big fans in my family, my brother-in-law and my youngest. They're always like, they always want to know what's up next and what I'm working on. And the new thing comes out. Oh, can I be the first to read it? But the rest of the family is just like, oh, that's nice. Another book. Okay. Yeah, sure. It's
amazing how pedestrian it becomes over time. There's like, yeah, it's fine. Oh, you're working on Batman.
I mean, it's funny. The last book I published, which was also my first book for Scholastic. So to me, it was a huge deal. I get the first copy in the mail and came in the mail. I opened it, read it. Oh, that's cool. I put it on, there's a table just outside our dining room. It's like a little side table. I put it there and it sat there for like a week. Nobody even noticed it was there. I'm pretty sure I mentioned, I'm like, guys, the book is here, but nobody touched it for like a week. Whereas, in the past, you'd be like, oh my God, Dad's new book is here. Let's go celebrate. And now it's like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, just another one in a long line of great books. Yeah. It's got to be even more, especially when they hit the teenage years and you're like, say you have some kind of fight with your kid and the kid's out in the world to see some other kid reading your book. Like that would just be like the ultimate, like interesting little, parent son kid relationship.
It's fun because like I'll get mail from, family and friends in other parts of the world. Oh, look, we saw your book in the wild, or your book's in the library, or this teacher had your book. And my kids, they come across the book. I was like, oh yeah, it's Dad's book, whatever.
I remember the
teacher. I was gonna say, like, one of my youngest current teacher was like, "Oh, your dad wrote this book? Oh my God, that's amazing!" And he didn't tell me for like a week. And he's like I said, my biggest fan. Yeah. He's like, "Oh yeah, Mrs. T was like, yeah, your dad's a writer. That's awesome." I was like, "Oh, she said that to you today?" No, it was about a week ago. I don't know.
Yeah, like how pedestrian it gets after time. I remember one of my indie comics I did. I found it in on the rack at like Value Village, and I remember thinking that was like the highest acclaim to me, that somebody had bought it and then donated it to Value Village, and here it is for like $1 on the rack, which I thought was funny. The other question I wanted to ask you about was I saw you did graphic novels for Degrassi, and you mentioned that you had like projects you work on are only things that you have some kind of love or reverence for. Was Degrassi, like, did you love it so much, or is it like that you were compelled to do a graphic novel based in that world?
I was a big fan of the original series.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah.
And so when I was approached by the new series, I was like, there's a new series? And so I can't remember if it was the art director or whoever it was at the publisher who was trying to recruit me, was like, come to the office. I have DVDs you can bring home. And they had the first, like at that point, I think it was like 3 seasons had come out of Next Generation. And I binge watched that shit. Like I couldn't stop watching it. I watched like one episode. I was like, whoa, Snake's got a daughter. Oh my God. And just watch the next one. And so at first you're like, oh, whatever happened to Caitlin? Whatever happened to Joey? And then it becomes like, oh, now you're invested in the kids.
Yeah.
The new generation. So by the time I got through the first season, I remember texting or emailing the editor. I'm like, I'm in. What do you want me to do? I'm so in. So that's how that happened. And I still have such fond memories on working on that project, because it was like one of the few times that I actually felt like I was like a rock star, or whatever you want to call it, because so they invited me to the set and I met all the not all of them, but a bunch of the actors. And I eventually got to write some stuff for the show as well. But then when we did signings, they would pair me up with the actors. And of course, all the fans are out there. They're not there to see me.
Yeah.
But we got the limos and the security detail and like hundreds of like teenage girls screaming. I was just like, wow, I know it's not for me. And I definitely know it's not for me, because of one of the first times I did a signing at a Borders in the US. And so I marched out from the green room with two of the actresses, and I was behind them. And I remember hearing the kids like going, "Oh my God, it's Stacy!" like freaking out, whatever. Someone goes, "Who's the big guy?" And I hear somebody else, "I think he's the bodyguard," or whatever. Or like, "Is that her dad?" Because they don't look alike. That's all I heard throughout the whole thing.
That's her Filipino dad.
And I remember sitting down at the thing, and then so they would give out, they had copies of the book to sign, and then they would like walk past me. They'd like the girls would sign and they'd walk past me like, "I wrote it. Come back. I can sign that for you."
That's amazing. Yeah. They're like the actor who really had nothing to do with this and signs it, and you're just like, "But I wrote it," and they just walk away.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, on the one hand, it was like, wow, I feel like a rock star, but on the other hand, it was definitely putting me in my place. Right? It was like taking you down a peg. And then my favorite part was when people would come and go, "Oh, can we get a picture?" And then I'd be like, yeah, sure. And they'd give me the camera and ask me to take a picture of them with the two actors. Oh, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, sure, yeah, thanks." Well, every now and then the handlers would be like, "Come on, Jay, just slide in there. Just slide in there." And I'd be like, lean over and get into the picture. So you'll like see these pictures of me like in the newspaper, just like popping my head in, and the two actresses are over here. And they're like, "Who's that guy?" Like photobombing the girls.
Yeah. Now for the rest of the time, whenever someone shows someone that picture, they have to try to figure out who you are. And they'd be like, "Who's that?"
They're like, "Well, I think that's someone's dad. He brought his daughter to the sighting and just kind of fell in the camera." But the question I get asked the most often is like, "Hey, did you ever work with Drake?" Yeah. And the answer is yes, I did. Yes, I did. But he was Aubrey back then.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the pre-Drake days. And I'd imagine.
Well, no, here's the thing. The first day I met him, this is so funny. Okay. So I was at the studio. He came down and I was talking to like the creative director or something. And the creative director just got artwork from the artist showing the comic versions of all the different actors. So he posted them outside his office. So when the actors walk by, they would like, "Oh my God, that's me," or whatever. That's my character. So here comes Drake. And Chris, who's the creative director, is like, "Hey, Arby, check it out. Look, here's your thing." He's like, "Oh man, that's really cool." It's like, "But I'm so tired. Like I opened for Ice Cube last night. This was before he was anybody."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh wow, really? You opened for Ice Cube? Yeah. So you like you sing, you rap? Oh, okay, yeah, all right, that's cool." I was just like, "Oh, that's so cute. He like wants to be a rapper too." That's so cool. Like these kids are so talented.
Yeah.
There were other kids in the cast who were like self-produce their own albums and stuff. So I just think, he can buy me 500 times.
That's amazing. Wow. And especially like because that show itself is so deeply Canadian. Like the original and the new one, like I was talking to somebody the other day about things that feel like Canada owns it. I mean, there are a lot of artists that have gone on to become, international superstars, but to say things that feel like it's just ours, like the Tragically Hip or like Degrassi or those sort of things. That one is right up there for me. I mean, like I probably were watching reruns when I watched it, but that like I grew up with CBC and CTV and that was it. I had two channels. Right. So, Degrassi was it. It was that and reruns of The Simpsons or The Munsters or Addams Family or something that was on TV. That's all I really watched. And so there's a headspace in there that is constantly just filled with Degrassi and always will be, I think. So
I mean, like I said, I was a fan to begin with, and then I became a fan real quick of the new generation, next generation. And I'm glad I did it. I mean, like if anything that I've ever done outlasts anything else, it could very well be the Degrassi stuff. It's like in constant reruns. And like I said, I even wrote some stuff for the show that's on YouTube forever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
When that's all the comics I've ever written have like disintegrated into ash.
Degrassi will endure.
The one short Degrassi episode that I wrote with Drake in it is still going to be online somewhere, and someone's going to see it.
Yeah, that's super cool. So what's next for you? What projects you have on the go or anything coming up?
So I'm working on this series for DC called Batman Night Watch. It's a digital first series on a thing called the Batman. It's a long title, the Batman Bat Tech. But anyway, so it's a game. It's an AR game, and it comes with all sorts of content, including like stickers and links to different videos from the different cartoons that have come out over the years. And it's got this exclusive digital comic that I'm hoping they'll print and collect someday. Actually, the first issue was put out for Batman Day this past.
Cool.
Was it a month ago? 2 months ago? I can't remember. Anyway, so there's 10 chapters. I think 4 or 5 are on there now. It's an app. You can download it on your phone or your tablet and read it for free. Awesome. So I'm wrapping that up. I'm going to be done with that relatively soon, and also working on a sequel to my graphic novel Planet Hockey, which came out last fall with Tim Levins and Scholastic. So I'm working on a sequel to that, which should be out in probably a year or 2 from now. So those are 2 of the projects I'm trying to get done before the holidays, so I can enjoy the holidays.
Yes, well, absolutely. And Scholastic is must be a huge win for you, because once you're in there, it seems like you're in for life, and you'll be reprinted.
And not only that, but not only that, I grew up with the Scholastic Book Club.
I know. I was going to say that too, because I miss those days actually, and how much of a highlight it'd be to go into the book fair with $10 your mom gave you and buy a couple books.
Yeah. And so at some point in my career, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, I was like, okay, bucket list, get in the Scholastic catalog, just so my kids can bring it home and go, look, you're in the catalog, you're in the, remember that newspaper flyer thing?
You got it at the library.
Right. And you check it off and here's $5 in the envelope, give it to your teacher, whatever.
Yeah.
So one of my dreams, of course, was to be in that thing. And finally, so that happened. Check it off the bucket list.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jay. It was a real honor to talk to you.
Oh, my pleasure. This was fun.
Oh, well, I'm really happy to hear that. And I look forward to reading the next Planet Hockey. And actually, I haven't got to the Vindicators, Rick and Morty yet, but I do collect the series. So I think it's not too far from the top of my read pile. So I'm very excited to get to that next.
Oh, cool. Yeah, let me know what you think. I had so much fun writing that.
Yeah, I would imagine so, because the show has such a unique voice, and it's so... Mm-hmm. As someone who probably experiences existential dread on a regular basis, a comic that really leans into it as hard, or a series rather, and the subsequent comic that leans into it as hard as that series does, is right up my alley, 100%. So I'm on board.
Awesome. Yeah, let me know what you think.
I will. Thank you, Jay.
Right. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye. Hey, wasn't that a great discussion? Jay was super great with his time and super forthcoming, and we got into a lot of interesting stuff about his life, about comics, and about his style of writing, and some fun anecdotes. The thing about Drake was pretty interesting. I'm not a massive fan of his music, but he is a good Canadian kid, so as it were, in a way that, he's a Canadian that made it big, so, he definitely has a lot of support in the Canadian fields, and globally, he's a big superstar, but... some people like giant rap stars, some people like comic writers that they get to talk to, and I know I am of the latter. So I'm very thankful for Jay Torres for coming on, and for you for tuning in. Tune in 2 weeks' time when I talk with my co-host from the X-rated X-Men Anime Review podcast, David Skellhorn. David's a really cool guy. I met him several years ago at a convention, and now we get to finally learn all about him and talk maybe a little bit about our podcast that we do together. Do a little bit of cross-promotion there. However, David's a very interesting cat with some great life experience, so I'm looking forward to talking with him on a deeper level, and not quite the zany hijinks that comes with the X-rated X-Men Anime Review podcast, which is a bit of a mouthful if you say it all, but if you just say the X-rated podcast, it sounds kind of like porn. But I'm kind of okay with that. I think it's, if you're doing a show rating X-Men, you have to say X-rated, because we're rating the X-Men. It's a great little double entendre. And I'm okay with it, and I hope you are too. And I hope you'll tune in 2 weeks' time to hear me talk with David. In the meantime, happy holidays, and I will catch you next time.